having covered off the visa that applies to employees in a business, then what about if you as a founder of the company, a shareholder of the company, a promoter of the company, who's a foreign national that doesn't have permission to join in or establish that business? What is the visa type that applies to you? Well, again, under the General Employment Policy, it's the business investment visa as an entrepreneur. And in essence, to get this visa approved, you have to demonstrate that you can make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong, which in many ways is like asking how long is a piece of string. But there are certain themes that present themselves in every approved business investment visa application. And these are, have you got a clear pathway to the creation of local employment opportunities? If your business is only ever going to be a one-man show, then because the test is substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong and not substantial contribution to the individual applicant, you take a one-man business story to the Immigration Department, the likelihood of you being approved is very low. The second leg of the approvability stool, as I've couched it, is you need to have a properly set up office. Now, if you plan to run this enterprise from your spare bedroom and your kitchen table and you tell the Immigration Department that, they're not going to approve you. So in essence, you need to come and get business accommodation in Cyberport or a co-working space, or you can share offices with other parties as long as it's properly documented. You obviously can take on serviced offices, you can establish your own bricks and mortar premises. But you absolutely need to have a properly set up office in order to persuade the Immigration Department that this business is properly homed and you've got a roof that you can put over the heads of your future employees when they show up for work each day. And the third leg of the approvability stool is kind of split into two types. There's funding resources on the one hand and non-funding resources on the other. Now the funding resources are kind of, I always tell clients, if you go into an application with $1 million Hong Kong dollars available to you, and it depends on what your plan is obviously and what the need for capital is in the business, but if you've got $1 million Hong Kong dollars available to you, during the course of what has traditionally been 4 to 6 months for the Immigration Department to finalise these applications, although we might see these things sped up a little bit now. But normally during that 4 to 6 months, the Immigration Department are expecting to see you invest ahead of the approval, creating new facts on the ground, so you are establishing the genesis of a business operation that persuades the Immigration Department that you can make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong. If you're only going to do it on the basis of a mere plan, and some nationalities are only able to do it on the basis of a mere plan because they either need entry visas to come to Hong Kong first for them just to be able to visit, or they only get a 2-week limit of stay, a very short limit of stay, and they're not able then to spend extended periods of time creating new facts on the ground prior to the approval of these applications. But if you are in the latter category, then usually the investment sum is significantly increased, usually by another 100%. But the vast majority of people who make these applications are here, they're visa-free nationals, they come and they create all the new facts on the ground, demonstrate to the Immigration Department that they're implementing the plan and that they are in a position to make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong. And at the end of the exercise, the Immigration Department take all that on board and then we'll grant them the approval. So that's the funding resources. If you find yourself here as an existing resident, say you've got an employment visa sponsored by somebody else and you've ceased working for that employer, it isn't commonly understood that you get two privileges with an employment visa. You get the privilege to work for the sponsoring employer and the sponsoring employer only, and you get the privilege to reside. And the privilege to reside flows naturally from the privilege to work, because you've got to be able to be living in Hong Kong to be able to report to work each day. When you stop working for your employer of record, your privilege to work ceases, but your privilege to reside continues until your current limit of stay expires, whereupon you're expected to leave. So if you stop working for a prior employer and you have a valid limit of stay still remaining in your passport, if you wish to reinstate your privilege to work, you either have to make an application to change your employment visa sponsor, that's if you're working for an independent arm's length third-party employer, or you have to apply to change your immigration status from sponsored employment through to business investment. And when you make that application, essentially you're making this type of application, business investment as an entrepreneur. Now there's a big difference between being an existing resident when you make an application for this visa type and being a visitor or a non-resident when you apply for this visa type. And that is, under existing policy, if you're an existing resident, the Immigration Department are minded to approve these applications because you're an existing resident, just so long as it's clear that you've got a decent plan and you've got the resources to be able to deliver on it. The good news is that normally the funding resources that are required if you're an existing resident are typically halved. So you can get away with an application, in my experience, if you've only got about $500,000 Hong Kong dollars available to you, rather than having, say, $1 million Hong Kong dollars if you're a non-resident. So that's kind of how the funding situation plays itself out. If you've got a business plan that calls for significantly more funding than that, then clearly that's not sufficient. But for all practical purposes, in my experience, start off with $1 million, finish with $500,000. That is, if you're a visitor or a non-resident during the currency of your application, that box is ticked OK. If you're an existing resident and you're seeking to change your visa category, then normally the funding requirement is kind of halved, in my experience. So those are the funding resources. Now the non-funding resources, which are also required as part of the third leg of the approvability stool, are all the kinds of things that you have at play and typically present in your opportunity that's driving you or giving you the confidence to make this investment decision in Hong Kong in the first place. So these can be things like you've got an MVP that you're about to commercialise, you've got work in progress with prospect clients, you've got a history of revenue, you've got some other IP that's proven to be deployed successfully somewhere else, and if you use it in Hong Kong, there's a clear opportunity that you're going to be successful here as well. Essentially what the Immigration Department are looking for is sustainability. They won't approve an application if all the other stuff's in place but there's no clear path to revenue, and if you don't have a clear path to revenue, you don't have the funding to carry you through till such a time as you are able to deliver quality revenues. The Immigration Department are not going to approve an application where the business doesn't really have any clear evidence of being able to sustain itself over the long term. But if you can put all those things together, you'll find that the Immigration Department will respond positively to your application because they want to encourage welcome investment. So that's how the business investment visa as an entrepreneur plays out. Is there any specific questions you'd like to ask me so far?
I've had two companies in Hong Kong. One's been established since 2004, the other one since 2009. My visa status is different while I'm currently here. If I wanted to change my status to one of my two already established companies, would I be doing that as a business investor?
What's your immigration status today?
Spousal.
Okay, so you're here as a dependent, and as a dependent visa holder, you're lawfully employable. As is, you can engage in any kind of business. So if you're seeking to adjust your status from dependent through to having a well-established business, and you can demonstrate you've been running that business, and it essentially has all of the three legs of the approvability stool in place, the Immigration Department will no doubt approve a change in your visa category from dependent through to either employment or business investment, depending on what the structure of the company looks like.
Okay. And then the other question is, I don't want to change my status, but I want to hire somebody to run those businesses for me now because I'm growing them.
Yeah.
If they're already in Hong Kong visiting, so
yeah,
there's on the 90-day
yeah,
sort of process.
Yeah.
Do I bring them in from the first job category you noted, or under the entrepreneur, and they're going to be the director for the company?
So independent arm's length third-party employees, no interest in the business, no investment in the business, right? So it's the first type, an employment visa under the general employment policy on the strength of a job offer you extend to them.
And then the last question is kind of, you said there is a market test.
Labour market testing, yeah.
What the market test, is that just putting out job advertisements?
Yeah, putting out the job advertisements, bringing in the CVs, redacting the certain personal information, putting that all together with your application bundle and say, we'd like to extend this job off, we'd like to employ this guy, these are his credentials, this is his employment contract, this is our company, we've had a look in the local labour force, we can't find these skills, this is the result of our labour market testing exercise, please give him a visa.
All right. With the consultancy agreement that was mentioned before, could that get you around the market test?
No.
Okay.
No. Well, it depends. I don't want to say completely. I would suggest, given the environment that we're moving into, it's better just to have an ongoing initiative to try and test the market to see whatever skills you're looking for is available, and then pull that information out to the immigration department. So we're continuously looking, and clearly these skills that we are demanding aren't available here. And this is how we've fared the last 3-6 months, something like that, if you're not going to do a particular test for that particular job. Yeah, great, good. Any other questions on that one?
I've got a quick question, Stephen, and this in no way alludes to this gentleman or me. But if you get divorced, what and you're working on a dependent visa, and you lose your position of work at around the same time as you get divorced, what happens? Is there some kind of, you're there working, you've got the dependent visa because the other person's working, and you happen to get divorced through no fault of your own, let's say, what happens to the...
Right. So when you get a dependent visa, in order for you to extend that, you have to go back to the immigration department and show that you're still in a loving, committed life partner relationship with your spouse. If you're not able to do that because the marriage is irretrievably broken down, then the immigration department are not actually going to ask you for any information about the state of your marriage until such a time as you actually make an application to extend your dependent visa. So if your marriage breaks down here and then 6 months later your dependent visa expires, you can continue living and working in Hong Kong under your dependent visa. What I would do is say 60 days before your dependent visa is due to expire, go to the immigration department, demonstrate that your marriage is irretrievably broken down, that you haven't just left home, you've taken concrete steps to bring the marriage to an end, and then get a sponsored employment visa, or get an employment visa sponsored by your existing employer at that point in time. And normally the immigration department are sensitive to those situations, and they're not going to give you such a hard time if you don't fully qualify as a professional in those circumstances. As long as the compensation is broadly commensurate with market rates and it's reasonable and justifiable in all the circumstances, for them to swap you from a dependent visa through to a sponsored employment visa, in my experience they will do that.
Right. Yeah, we've had I think you've spoken to one of our clients who had that issue actually, but we've had a couple.
Yeah. So if you've got a newly established business, you would want to demonstrate to the immigration department a certain sophistication, and you can do that by...
Yeah, there's a whole variety of ways, of course, that you can demonstrate to the visa department that you're a legitimate, sophisticated, professional business. One way is through a business plan. Many of you here have already created a business plan, but many businesses don't at any stage. Of course, it's a very useful document when it comes to getting funding from banks, from investors, for dealing with with governmental bodies like the visa department. You might also, if it's part of your business, and it often is, want to show that you've registered trademarks, that you've registered the name and or brand of your business, and you've protected it. That shows a commitment to Hong Kong. It shows a commitment to doing things right. Protecting your legal assets as you build your business. Often, remember, of course, that often businesses, when they're in startup mode, have very little or no income, very few assets, few, if any, employees. But showing that you've taken the time to protect the one thing that you do own and that actually has some substantive value, i.e. your name and your brand, can help you bolster, for want of a better word, that impression that you're a business, legitimate business, and one with a future. Linked to that, of course, linked to the idea that you would have registered your trademark for protection. You might need documents that also deal with your intellectual property. Other types of intellectual property include things like patents, copyright, this kind of thing. I've already mentioned the fact that you should use documents generally, such as employment and consultancy contract, to protect your intellectual property. But it may be, for example, that you're, as a business, you're held by a holding company. Maybe it's offshore, maybe it's somewhere else. Who actually own the intellectual property, and that intellectual property is licensed to your business, your operating business here in Hong Kong. You'd want to be able to show that you've got paperwork, i.e. An assignment or license agreement that demonstrates that that's been legally and properly transferred. Finally, staff handbook, and there's plenty of other, staff policies, the sort of thing that anyone here who's worked in a large organisation will be aware of. But a staff handbook might include such things as, a policy on using social media, a disciplinary policy, policies, anti-corruption policy, / bribery policy, anti-harassment policy, whatever you put in those sorts of policies that allow your employees to know where they stand in the office environment and in work environment. Again, that all goes towards almost a portfolio, a bunch of documents that show that you're a sophisticated business. That might also, I suppose, and adding another one to this list, if you had any kind of early stage investment, then that would no doubt be something, whether you had investment agreement or convertible note or even maybe evidence that you've borrowed money or put your own money into the business as a director's loan, something like that just shows the authenticity of what you're trying to prove.
Yeah. I mean, proof of investment, if you make an application with a visa type, is an integral part of the application. Now, you can do that in a number of ways. Most sort of inexperienced entrepreneurs just put a loan into the company and don't document it. But if you document it, you're showing to the immigration department that you've got a sophistication that many entrepreneurs don't actually have, for example.
I mean, a lot of these sorts of things are things that you should do anyway. So it's not just a question of visas. It certainly helps with that side of things, and you're building and you're growing a business that recruits more people. You've got more to protect over time, and as Stephen said, certainly in regard to any sort of investment related documents, then you should keep a record.
Great stuff. Okay, so what about this thing called the startup visa? Has anybody heard of the startup visa? Okay, well, on May the 5th last year, the Immigration Department introduced something called the enhancement measures to our general employment policy. And the enhancement measures contain many different facets, many different adjustments. But one of the key things that the enhancement measures reflect is this consultation exercise that the Immigration Department did with interested stakeholders about 18 months or so ago. And they took on board representations from the startup community who were complaining vociferously about the fact that it's so hard to get a visa if you're a startup in Hong Kong. And the reason it's so hard to get a visa if you start up in Hong Kong is that invariably you can't pass the approvability test of demonstrating that you can make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong, because it's all still too early. So in sort of responding to this, the Immigration Department said, well, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to acknowledge that there are 5 or 6 accredited programs in Hong Kong that startup entrepreneurs can go and make applications to join the incubator type programs, startup type initiatives that support startup initiatives. And I read yesterday that Cyberport's just about to launch invitations to receive applications for 2 of their funds. I think it's June the 1st, perhaps the deadline for applications need to be met by. But in any event, essentially what happens is that you've got the challenge of securing a business investment visa as an entrepreneur on the immigration side of the equation as a startup. But on the other side, if you can go along to one of these government accredited programs and get yourself accepted onto one of these programs, then the Immigration Department will allow you to tick a box on the application form. And when you're able to tick this box, which is a letter stating that you've been accepted onto one of these government accredited programs, then in essence what you do is you take all your paperwork for a business investment visa as an entrepreneur, warts and all, knowing that you're not going to be able to make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong because you haven't got enough money, or because you're not going to be generating revenue anytime soon, or there's no clear pathway to the creation of local jobs, or whatever the weaknesses are. Irrespective of how that bundle looks, you prepare your complete application, and then adding on top of the bundle is your letter of acceptance from this program, from one of these programs. By submitting an application with a letter of acceptance and ticking this box on page 3 of the application form, the Immigration Department will favourably consider your application for a business investment visa as an entrepreneur. And that means they'll basically grant you the approval. And so the focus with this so-called startup visa isn't so much on how to get the Immigration Department's permission, it's can you get accepted onto one of these programs? And those are two completely separate challenges, very different challenges. So in essence, get yourself onto one of these programs and you are rubber stamped into this so-called startup visa, which is really just an entrepreneur visa by the back door because you've been able to include this particular letter of acceptance in your application bundle. So it's not about immigration, it's about being accepted onto these programs. Any questions about the startup visa? Okay, great stuff.
Right, okay.
By all means.
Can you switch from a normal working visa to I leave my job, set up a company, get accepted in one of those programs, and switch to the startup visa?
Yeah.
You could switch, right?
You can do that, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.